Tyran Stokes, the top high school senior in the country, is planning a visit to Gonzaga in another massive win for Coach Mark Few on the recruiting trail.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, folks, Arizona State will host Gonzaga over their homecoming weekend. We're going to talk about what that means for the Zags, what it means for their non-conference schedule, some familiar faces at Arizona State that Gonzaga is going to face. We're going to get to all that, but first, we got to continue talking about the wins for Coach Mark Few on the recruiting trail. Less than 72 hours after the announcement that Gonzaga will host the top-ranked player in the 2027 recruiting class, Baba Olatunji. Now we know that Gonzaga is going to host the top-ranked player in the 2026 recruiting class on a visit as well. That is Tyran Stokes. We've talked about Tyran Stokes before a handful of times on the show. His connection to Gonzaga has been known for a while. I believe he told ESPN's Paul Biancardi a few months ago at this point that he was planning to take a visit to Gonzaga, but it hadn't been confirmed. It was just kind of a one-off sentence in this article by Biancardi a few months ago. So there wasn't really a lot of momentum, or at least not publicly known momentum, between Gonzaga and Tyran Stokes, to the point where we kind of backed off talking about him as we saw Gonzaga be more involved in players like Ikenna Elozie and Sam Funches and Cameron Holmes and Hurley Brutus and a few other guys that they're pursuing in that 2026 class. But now we get a recent update, courtesy of Tyran Stokes' mother, actually, who was speaking with Jacob Polachek of On3, talking about Tyran's plans and the visits that he's taking. And she indicated that Tyran is still planning to take a visit to Gonzaga. Now, Mrs. Stokes did not indicate the timing of the visit for any of the upcoming visits that Tyran Stokes is planning. She mentioned in this interview that the last time that a visit was publicly known, there was like people who kind of hoarded them and surrounded them at the airport, and I think it made them a little uncomfortable. So they're deciding to keep the dates of their actual visits private for now. So I think that at this point, it without knowing the dates, it still feels like a little theoretical for Gonzaga hosting Tyran Stokes, but by all indications, this is happening. We just do not know when it is going to happen. We do know that Gonzaga is bringing Sam Funches, one of the top players in the 2026 class, a four-star center. We know he's coming onto campus for Craziness in the Kennel October 3rd through 5th. We know that Baba Olatunji, the 2027 top recruit, is coming sometime in October, is what had been kind of implied or vaguely indicated. So it's possible that they're trying to get Olatunji and Funches on campus at the same time. Would be something else entirely if Gonzaga also had Tyran Stokes on campus in October. There are programs, the Blue Bloods, I assume, Duke and Kentucky and programs like that have had the top ranked recruit in consecutive recruiting classes on campus on a visit at the same time. I am sure that it has happened. I can say confidently it has not happened at Gonzaga before. And the idea that this is a realistic potential thing that could be happening in just a couple of months is proof of how hard this staff is working and pivoting towards high school recruiting. And I think there's a variety of reasons why. We've touched on the uncertainty around the house settlement for programs that have football and that are therefore kind of beholden to spending a large chunk of their salary cap on their football team and not necessarily knowing how easy it will be to funnel money through third-party NIL deals, whereas Gonzaga, which will not have the same total amount of money as programs like Kentucky and Arkansas and other SEC or Big Ten schools, but will not have to throw any of their money at a football team because they do not have one. I think that allows Gonzaga to be more aggressive in their pursuit of future high school recruits because they can be more consistent about promising them money, where these other programs maybe aren't going to be able to do that. I think Gonzaga's move to the Pac-12 obviously helps too. It helps make recruits more interested in potentially coming onto campus and potentially coming to Gonzaga at all. So I think that those are two of the main factors for how they've been able to be so aggressive on the recruiting trail. Talking about Stokes more specifically, Tyran is a 6'7", 245-pound monster small forward from Sherman Oaks, California. If you listened to last Friday's episode where we talked about Baba Olatunji, you know that he's 6'9" and 170 pounds. So Tyran Stokes is like 60 pounds heavier and 2 pounds shorter because he is just an absolute massive muscular dude. And Olatunji is, as we described it on that show, a few cheeseburgers away from being considered skinny. So these two players could not look more different, but Stokes is just, he's built like an NBA caliber athlete already. He plays at Notre Dame High School in Sherman Oaks, which is the same high school Gonzaga plucked Dusty Stromer from a few years ago. However, Stokes is actually from Louisville and has already been pursued very heavily by Louisville. He's taken an official visit there. He's also taken official visits to both Kansas and Kentucky. So yeah, Gonzaga's got some very legitimate competition for Tyran Stokes, as he's got the visits already done with the Jayhawks, with the Wildcats, with the Louisville Cardinals, and then he is planning to take visits not only to Gonzaga, but Oregon and USC as well. Again, those visits to Oregon and USC are not known in terms of the dates, but it does sound like those are the other schools kind of in the Tyran Stokes sweepstakes. Arkansas was connected at one point. I don't know if they have fallen off the radar or if they were not mentioned here, but it sure sounds like Kansas, Kentucky, Louisville are kind of the front runners. But again, Gonzaga and Oregon at least have been in the mix for a while. USC is a fairly newer team into this conversation, but what an incredible opportunity for Gonzaga to even be involved with a player like Tyran Stokes at this point. He's an electric playmaker, an extremely high-level athlete, phenomenal finisher around the rim. Not surprising considering how much stronger he is than most of the players around him physically. He can get to the rim. He can finish around the rim. He's got high-level athleticism, extreme explosiveness as an athlete. But beyond that, he's also a great playmaker. He's a very gifted passer for his age. He's not just a bully his way to the rim and score. The outside shot is still a work in progress for him at this point, but he led Notre Dame to a 28-8 record last year, averaged 21 points, 9 boards, and 4 assists. He averaged very similar numbers, about 20.5 points, 9 boards, 3.5 assists for the Oakland Soldiers on the EYBL circuit. And he shot over 40% from three there. So against good quality high school competition, he did show an outside shot. He was also on the FIBA U19 team that won the Team USA team that won the World Cup this past month or so, as in early July, I think, when that finished up. It was coached by Tommy Lloyd. So, not obviously a direct Gonzaga connection at this point, but it probably can't hurt, at least, to have been on a team with somebody who's affiliated with Gonzaga. On this team, again, that was filled with quite a few guys who are in his same recruiting class or guys who are older than him, who are about to be freshmen in college. Stokes played well. He averaged 10 points, 4.5 boards, 2.5 assists, just under 2 steals in those 7 games. Did not shoot the 3-ball well. He only took 2 of them, but 75% on his 2-point attempts, 80% from the free throw line, 10 points and 7 rebounds in the championship game against Germany. Just really, really good stuff from Tyran Stokes in that event, a player that would be an extraordinary talent to bring to Gonzaga, unlike any player they've ever had before. Realistically, I mean, we're talking like supercharged jumbo, Caliph Battle, 2 inches taller, 50 pounds heavier, but with a similar skill set in a lot of ways. He would be an unbelievable talent to bring to Spokane. We mentioned Gonzaga, some other targets for them. Ikenna Elozi, he's listed Gonzaga in his top 8. Plans to visit, the date to be determined there. Zags also have offers out to 4 stars Hurley Brutus and 5-star Cameron Holmes in the 2026 class, as well as Sam Funches, who's planning that visit in October. And then the Zags are also pursuing, in addition to Olatunji in the 2027 class, also pursuing 4-star guard Jalen Davis from Bremerton and 4-star wing Dooney Johnson from Wisconsin. So lots of names on the board right now for the Zags. Again, a clear sign that they are really, really pushing hard to bring in some talent in these upcoming recruiting classes. Well, folks, Gonzaga's heading to Tempe to take on Arizona State during homecoming weekend. And the Sun Devils, they got a lot of familiar faces on the roster. We're going to get into that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the summer sports are in full swing, whether you're all about baseball under the lights now that the All-Star game is over, golf out on the green, or high-stakes soccer action. FanDuel is the best way to make every game a little more exciting. and you're already following the action, so why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game action while your friends are getting sunburned out at the beach. You can use FanDuel to track your favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. So whether you're placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right out into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you're part of the action. Gonzaga remains plus 3,500 odds to win that 2026 national championship. If you like that, check it out. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's a great time because new customers get $5. If you bet $5, you get $150 in bonus bets. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from our recruiting conversation about Tyran Stokes and Baba Oladotun and the litany of highly regarded 4- or 5-star players Gonzaga is pursuing in the upcoming 2 recruiting classes, to instead talk about a scheduling update we got on Friday. We know now the date for Gonzaga's game against the Arizona State Sun Devils. We knew this game was going to happen. Of course, it is the return game of a home-and-home that started last year. Gonzaga will travel down to Desert Financial Arena to take on the Sun Devils on Friday, November 14th. Again, it is homecoming week for Arizona State. They are playing Gonzaga on Friday, and then they will play West Virginia in a football matchup on Saturday. Probably going to make a pretty rowdy atmosphere. I had a feeling that that Arizona State road game was going to be pretty rowdy regardless. Most road games against power conference teams tend to be pretty rowdy, especially because Gonzaga does not play a lot of true road games against power conference teams, and mostly because those same teams are not willing to play Gonzaga at home. So why would Gonzaga play them on the road? But shout out to Bobby Hurley and Arizona State for being willing to do that. And if you recall, Arizona State gave Gonzaga a little bit of trouble last year. It was, I think, the third game of the year or the second game of the year for Gonzaga after they had absolutely blasted Baylor by 38 points. And it felt like, wow, Gonzaga is going to do no wrong this year. And then they kind of stumbled, mostly defensively, not a surprise, against this Arizona State team last year. Gonzaga still ultimately won that game 88-80, but it was a pretty close game, especially for a home contest for the Zags. Against a team that went 4-16 in the Big 12 and really, really struggled. They started out strong, but just things faded fast for Arizona State. They had a suspension. They had some injuries, just were not able to ever play at that level again. Braden Huff, 21 points off the bench for Gonzaga in that one, 9 of 13 shooting. Ryan Nembhard had one of his many double-doubles in that game, 13 points, 11 assists on 3 of 6 shooting. Caleb Battle had 19 and 7 boards. He was a perfect 8 of 8 from the free throw line. This gives Gonzaga 3 early season games against Power 4 opponents, or Power 5 opponents, excuse me. They're playing Oklahoma on November 8th. That game is at the Spokane Arena. 3 days later, they will play Creighton on November 11th. That game will be at the McCarthy Athletic Center. And then 3 days after that, they will play Arizona State on the 14th, again down in Tempe. So 3 games, power conference teams, all at the very beginning of the season. Then there's a small gap, and then there's been a report that Gonzaga is playing Southern Utah on the 17th. That has not been confirmed by either Southern Utah or Gonzaga. But if that is true, then that's probably the last game before Gonzaga plays in the Players Era Festival, which is November 24th, 25th, 26th, with Gonzaga playing Alabama and Maryland in that mix. All this to say, with so many early season games against quality opponents, I am wondering if the Baylor game is not going to happen early in the season like we're expecting it to. Last year, of course, Gonzaga played Baylor on the first day of the season. That was a late decision. There had been a lot of swirling rumors of trying to figure out when is Gonzaga going to play Baylor. There had been rumors of them playing in Mexico City. There had been rumors of them playing like just a variety of different times. Maybe it'll be a mid-season game or like a mid-conference season game. Ultimately, they ended up figuring out a way to get that game done on November 4th, I believe is what it was, the first day of the season. So that's kind of been the expectation of, well, that'll be what it is again, because this is a 3-year series for Gonzaga and Baylor. We know that there's going to be one game at Baylor, and then we know there's going to be one game at a neutral site, whether that's Vegas, whether that is an attempt to get this thing in Mexico City, whether it's the Sanford Pentagon, where Gonzaga has played Baylor in the past. Who knows? But I'm less confident it'll be like on the first couple of days of the season, because that would be 4 straight Power 4 Power 5 conference games for Gonzaga right off the bat. And maybe they do that. Maybe they feel comfortable doing that. But with a team that's having a fair amount of roster turnover, an entirely new backcourt, I'm not sure that's the strategy that Gonzaga and Mark Few want to do. So I wouldn't be surprised if this Baylor game ends up happening in December, or maybe they try to squeeze it in the conference portion of the season. I know the Big 12 went from 20 games to 18 games in their conference slate, but I do know that Baylor has already agreed to at least one game during the conference season. So I don't know how many more they could potentially squeeze in. So keeping a close eye on when that Baylor game may end up happening. Let's talk a little bit about this Arizona State team. We'll obviously have a bigger preview of them as we get closer to the date, but there's a lot of storylines already between these two programs coming into this game. The most notable one, of course, being that the last time these two teams played, Adam Miller was playing on the other side with Arizona State. And in this game in November, he will be playing for Gonzaga. Adam Miller had 8 points, 3 assists, 3 boards, and a pair of steals against Gonzaga in that game. He was 3 of 10 from the field. He was 2 of 7 from 3. He is a well-traveled player who began his career at Illinois, spent some time at LSU before spending the last 2 years at Arizona State. So he has done this before. He's hit the transfer portal before. He's not even really going to be playing against a bunch of his old teammates. Arizona State, according to Bart Torvik, has 2.2% of their minutes from last year's team returning. A lot of graduations. A lot of guys who hit the transfer portal. Jaden Quaintance goes to Kentucky. Joson Sonone goes to St. John's. Amir Ali transfers to Mississippi State. Like, this is a team that most of the guys that Adam Miller was teammates with last year are no longer in the picture. So it's not really going to feel like a whole lot of a homecoming for him, for lack of a better word, but I suspect the fans will give him a warm welcome when he returns to Tempe for their homecoming game. I suspect that he's going to hear a whole lot from that Arizona State fan base, as he should. I think that's part of the deal. When you play true road games in this environment, you're going to hear it. So that'll be a fun part of this game. Outside of that, Arizona State added a few players in the transfer portal that Gonzaga's pretty darn familiar with. The most notable of the bunch being Mo Odom. Mo Odom, who was at Pepperdine last year. He was at Pacific prior to that, spent a lot of time in the WCC, a guy that spent a lot of time playing against Gonzaga. He was outstanding last year for the Waves. He scored 24 points against Gonzaga in a alarmingly close game against Pepperdine for the Zags. He had 24 points and 8 assists in that one as well. He was tremendous in the WCC tournament, nearly pulled off some stunning upsets to get Pepperdine closer and closer to potentially pulling off what would have been one of the biggest stories in all of college hoops if they had been able to pull off an upset and make it all the way to the NCAA tournament. Either way, Mo Odom went nuclear in Las Vegas for a couple of days, ends up now going to Arizona State. I'm very excited to see what he can do in Bobby Hurley's offense. They also land Marcus Adams Jr., who's transferring to Arizona State from CSUN, Cal State Northridge. Marcus Adams Jr. originally started his career at Kansas, but transferred before he'd ever played a game at Kansas. He entered the transfer portal because he had enrolled in classes. He transferred to Gonzaga, spent about a month committed to Gonzaga, ultimately never ended up showing up even to campus, I don't think. Never played for Gonzaga, ended up going to BYU, played just one game as a freshman at BYU in the 23-24 season, transferred again, this time to go closer to home to be near his family. I think his father was having health issues. So he goes to CSUN and was awesome for the Matadors, like 17 points a game, 60% on 2-pointers, 40% from 3. Like he was truly one of the best and more unheralded mid-major players in all of college hoops last year. And he committed really early in the transfer portal to Arizona State, which sort of surprised me. I think he could have ended up somewhere else had he kind of waited a little bit longer, but he's at Arizona State now. He's going to be a big part of Bobby Hurley's team and another familiar face for Gonzaga fans. The Sun Devils also roster former San Diego big man Santiago Truett, who averaged about 9 points and 7 rebounds in 25 minutes a game last year for Steve Lavin and the Toreros. So another player that Gonzaga will be familiar with in this contest in November. Arizona State ranked 70th in the country, according to Bart Torvik's preseason rankings. I also plugged their roster into Evan Miyakawa's website, which does preseason rankings based on roster, and it had them in the range between 71 and 76. So that's kind of the consensus spot for Arizona State right now is a borderline top 70 team in the country. Again, last year, this team started off strong and then went an abysmal 4-16 in Big 12 play, nowhere close to making the NCAA tournament. We'll see if Coach Hurley can get some momentum on his side and have a strong season here, because if he does not, he might not be at Arizona State a whole lot longer. But what does this mean for Gonzaga's non-conference schedule? We touched on it a little bit, but it's almost finalized. We're going to take a look at the games we know, the games we don't know, what might be coming down the pipeline, all that coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, closing out the show, continuing our conversation about Gonzaga's non-conference slate. Now that we know the date for Gonzaga's matchup against Arizona State. By the way, I don't believe we have a time for that matchup. I would have said so if we do. So once we get that and some TV information, we may not get that until much closer to the season, but we'll of course report that when we have it as well. Here's what we know about Gonzaga's non-conference schedule at this point. Gonzaga's first known game on the calendar, as we said earlier, is November 8th. This will be against Porter Moser and the Oklahoma Sooners. This game will be at the Spokane Arena, part of a home-and-home series. I will be interested to see if the return game is in Oklahoma or if it is at Oklahoma's campus, something we have seen before where the home-and-home series are not actually at the Kennel for Gonzaga, but the return game is often at the other team's opposing arena, as we've seen with Kentucky, somewhat notably. So we'll see if that's the case here with Oklahoma. Shout out Porter Moser and the Sooners, by the way, for the last 2 years. They've dominated the non-conference, have done mediocre in the conference. Big 12 2 years ago, SEC last year, and barely snuck into the tournament. So this year they've scheduled a much more competitive non-conference slate. I'm curious to see how that goes for them. 3 days after that, Gonzaga will take on Creighton. Really good to see that series coming back. Obviously, the Ryan Nembhard of it all probably put a little pause on that series, but this will be the first game of a home-and-home series. The game on November 11th should be at the McCarthy Athletic Center, so that'll be a true home game for Gonzaga. It's very rare for Gonzaga to get home games against marquee teams like Creighton, who will probably be ranked in the top 25 when the season starts. It'll be close. I think I had them just right around top 25. Most places that are doing early rankings have them kind of 20 to 30 range, so we'll see if they end up being in the top 25, but they'll be very close if they're not there exactly. And then 3 days after that is when Gonzaga will take on Arizona State. That'll be, of course, a true road game for Gonzaga, potentially the only true road game on Gonzaga's schedule. I would be somewhat surprised if they add another true road game at this point. So I think that's probably the only one. Any other games will be neutral sites or home games for the Zags. We have heard a report that Gonzaga will take on Southern Utah on November 17th. That game would be at the Kennel if it were to happen. Again, this has just been reported by one source that is typically on this stuff pretty accurately, but it has not been confirmed by the team. So we'll kind of wait to dig too far into that, but would be a logical date and opponent for Gonzaga at that point in the season. So wouldn't be surprised if that ends up becoming a reality. After that is when Gonzaga starts their Players Era Festival, November 24th against Alabama. That game at 6:30 Pacific time. November 25th against Maryland, also 6:30 Pacific time. Both those games in Las Vegas. Gonzaga will also play a game the following day, November 26th. The time and opponent will be to be determined based on how Gonzaga does in those first two games. After that, the next known game on the schedule, December 5th, Friday, versus Kentucky at the Bridgestone Arena in Nashville. Very fun neutral site game for the Zags. After Gonzaga, of course, played Kentucky in the Climate Pledge Arena last year. Zags still up 2-1 in that series, but lost to Mark Pope's team last year in Seattle. So they would love a little revenge by taking them down in Nashville this year. After that, the following Saturday, the December 13th, Gonzaga will take on UCLA at the Climate Pledge Arena. This is game 2 in a 2-year series that started last year when Gonzaga played UCLA at the Intuit Dome in Inglewood. Gonzaga lost that game to UCLA, so very much looking for a little revenge here in what has become one of the most fun non-conference matchups pretty much every year in college basketball. After that, December 17th, Gonzaga is hosting Campbell, the Camels, at the McCarthy Athletic Center again on December 17th, the only officially known bye game for Gonzaga again, while we still wait for confirmation on the Southern Utah game. Campbell has a new head coach who used to work for Todd Golden and Kyle Smith, so he's got some familiarity with Gonzaga. Should be fun to see how that matchup plays out. And then we know Gonzaga has taken on Baylor as part of this 3-year series that started last year with Gonzaga's massive 38-point win at the Spokane Arena. We do not know where the Baylor game will be. We're kind of assuming it'll be the neutral site game, with the third game in the series being at Baylor, but we don't know that for sure. And we also don't know the timing of this game. And like we talked about in the second segment, starting to wonder if this game ends up being like late December, like right before conference play starts, or if it's between the Players Era Festival, which ends on November 26th, and then the Kentucky game, which is December 5th. There's enough time there where there's going to be at least one game added in that stretch. Maybe that's where you get the Baylor game. Maybe they do end up playing Baylor on like November 3rd or 4th, and they just start the season with a wicked handful of games against power conference opponents. That is a possibility here. And again, maybe they try to find a way to squeeze this Baylor game in February or January. But again, I think that might be tough with Baylor having already scheduled a game in the Washington, and Baylor are playing each other in Waco during the conference slate. So I think that likely eliminates the odds of Gonzaga playing Baylor in February or January. And I think it also makes it very unlikely that Gonzaga will play Washington this year, which was another opponent we thought was a possibility for the Zags. But I don't think if the series is to resume, the game should be in Spokane, because the last time these two teams played was in Seattle. And I don't think Washington is going to play a true road game against Baylor and a true road game against Gonzaga in the non-conference slate. So I think Washington's probably out. I think Baylor is happening. I just do not know when. I think that the odds of Gonzaga scheduling a February non-con game are slipping. We've seen quite a few of them. I know Louisville's playing one. Duke and Michigan are playing each other. Like, there's quite a few of these games already being put on the schedule. And so I think Gonzaga would love to get in on one if they can make it happen. But you got to find a willing opponent, and then you got to find a way to make those dates work. So that's something we're keeping an eye on. But at this point, again, if the Southern Utah game is real, then Gonzaga doesn't have many more games to play with. And I think we're looking at bye games for any remaining contest that would happen. I don't think you're going to see any super marquee matchups added to a schedule that already features Oklahoma and Creighton and Arizona State and Kentucky and UCLA and Baylor, and then the three teams in the Players Era Festival. Like, that's plenty of marquee opponents. So I wouldn't be surprised if our last opponents that we see are something like Idaho or Long Beach State or Montana or something of that ilk, those types of teams that we typically see Gonzaga play. UMass Lowell last year was a big example. Like, you're always going to have 2 or 3, 4 of those type games every single year. Gonzaga doesn't have very many of them on the schedule yet, and not very many games left. So you kind of do the math and you figure those are probably the likely games to be added. I wouldn't be holding my breath for any more marquee matchups at this point, but would expect a few more games of that bye game ilk. And we'll see what happens with Gonzaga with their exhibition season as well. We have heard nothing on that, but last year Gonzaga had that exhibition against USC. We've seen them have exhibitions against Tennessee in the past. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a marquee team added to an exhibition slate, although I don't know that there's much room to add one to the regular non-conference slate as well. Just going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Special shout out to those everyday listeners as well. Appreciate all of you. I'll be back with the mailbag show later this week on Monday. Also already have an interview done with the great Theo Lawson of the Spokesman Review. We'll have that show for you as I'm going to be on vacation this week. So got a few shows kind of pre-planned for you all as we get into this upcoming week here on the show. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.